Soviet Union and Nazi Germany were allies. Poland, between giants. Soviet Union and Nazi Germany were allies. 1939 to 1945. Before the war began for most of Europe, it ended for Poland. In late August 1939, two dictators, who claimed to hate each other, Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin, quietly agreed to redraw the map. Publicly, the deal was a non-aggression pact. Secretly, it was a partition plan. 16 days after Germany attacked from the west, the Soviet Union entered from the east. And the line drawn in a hidden protocol turned into tank tracks across fields and streets. This video follows that line as it moves, from the signatures in Moscow to the two invasions of September 1939, from the joint destruction of the Polish state to the occupations that followed, from the rupture of the alliance of convenience in 1941 to the battles that returned the Red Army to Polish soil, and finally, to the bitter question that still divides memory. Who liberated Poland, and what did liberation actually mean? Watch how words on paper become borders on maps, orders to soldiers, and for millions, the shape of life and death. Point 1. The pact that made a front line. August-September 1939. In the summer of 1939, Europe was bargaining over time. London and Paris tried, late and half-heartedly, to assemble a collective security arrangement with Moscow. Stalin listened, doubted, and chose certainty. On 23 August, Germany and the Soviet Union signed a non-aggression pact in Moscow. Two sentences explain the logic. Hitler wanted freedom to strike Poland without risking a war with the USSR. Stalin wanted territory lost after the First World War, a buffer against Germany, and time to rearm. Each man expected to exploit the other. Both expected to exploit Poland. A month later, because the line on paper had to be matched on the ground, Berlin and Moscow refined the deal. On 28th of September, they signed a boundary and friendship treaty. The partition formalized, the frontier adjusted, rules for population transfers agreed. Point 2. September 1939. Two invasions, one outcome. At 4:45 a.m. on the 1st of September, the German battleship Schleswig-Holstein opened fire on the Polish depot at Westerplatte. Bombs fell on the town of Wielun. Panzer spearheads lunged from East Prussia, Pomerania, and Silesia. Polish armies fought where they could fight, counterattacking at the Bzura, holding at Hell, clinging to Warsaw, but speed, massed armor, and control of the air bent the front. But under what pretext did Germany attack and occupy Poland in 1939, using several false pretexts as justification for its invasion? But in reality, the goal was expansionist and strategic. So, the main pretexts were: first, protection of German minorities in Poland. Germany claimed it needed to protect German citizens living in Poland, a pretext Hitler used to justify the aggression. Germany used the same pretexts as those the USSR employed when it invaded Poland, and in more recent times, Ukraine and Georgia. Second, response to alleged Polish provocations. The Nazi regime claimed that Poland had carried out provocative acts against Germans or threatened German security, which was fabricated. The Nazi regime's claim that Poland carried out provocative acts against Germans in 1939 was entirely false. These were a series of manufactured false flag operations orchestrated by the German SS and Gestapo under the command of Heinrich Himmler, known as Operation Himmler, to create a pretext for the invasion of Poland and the start of World War II. The most prominent staged event was the Gleiwitz incident on the night of August 31, 1939. German SS operatives, disguised in Polish uniforms, attacked the Gleiwitz radio station near the border, broadcast a brief anti-German message in Polish, and fired shots before withdrawing. To make the attack appear real, German authorities used concentration camp prisoners, referred to as canned goods, who were killed and dressed in Polish uniforms to be presented as evidence of Polish aggression. Third, expansion plan and living space, Lebensraum. Despite these pretexts, the real goal was to acquire land for German settlement, expansion in Eastern Europe, extending Germany's influence, fulfilling Hitler's objectives in the East. The pretexts were purely propaganda to justify the invasion, while the real reason was expansionist, strategic, and driven by Hitler's obsession with controlling Poland and Eastern Europe. 16 days later, the Pact's second signature sent troops from the opposite horizon. On 17 of September, the Red Army crossed the eastern frontier. Moscow's note to the Polish ambassador declared that the Polish state had ceased to exist and that the USSR was moving to protect Ukrainians and Belarusians. The note's phrasing was legalistic. The secret protocol's map had already given the truth. But what pretext did the Soviet Russia, the Soviet Union, to attack and occupy Poland in 1939? USSR attacked and occupied the eastern part of Poland on September 17, 1939, under formal and misleading pretexts, while the real goal was to carry out the secret agreement with Nazi Germany to divide Poland. The pretexts announced by Moscow were: first, protecting the Ukrainian and Belarusian minorities. The Soviet Union claimed that the Ukrainian and Belarusian populations in Poland were in danger after the collapse of the Polish army, and that intervention was necessary to protect them. This was a political justification with no real basis. In modern times, Russian Federation, Russia, invaded or occupied parts of other countries using the same pretexts, Russian citizens and Russian speakers' pretexts. Russia invaded or occupied part of these countries. First, Russia invaded and occupied South Ossetia and Abkhazia in Georgia in 2008. During the 2008 war and since, Russia has invoked the protection of its citizens pretext. Russia had granted passports to many residents of these regions. Second, Russia invaded and occupied Crimea, Ukraine, 2014. When Russia annexed Crimea, its government publicly justified the takeover by claiming it had to protect Russian citizens and Russian-speaking people living in Crimea, alleging threats from the new government in Kyiv after the 2014 upheaval. Third, Russia invaded and occupied eastern Ukraine, Donbass, beginning in 2014 and escalating in 2022. The main goal of the Russian aggression, savage invaders, was to invade and occupy the whole Ukraine in 3 days. Now, the aggressor currently holds about 19 to 20% of Ukrainian territory, with the war still ongoing. Russian government propaganda has repeatedly claimed it intervenes to defend the rights of Russian speakers or compatriots in parts of Ukraine, under the cover of defending minorities or preventing persecution, similarity to historic tactics and propaganda. The pattern is totally the same as what happened in 1939. When the Soviet Union predecessor of modern Russia, used pretenses like protecting minorities to justify invading eastern Poland. In modern incidents, Russia first ensures passportization, giving Russian passports to people in neighboring regions, which later serves as a legal political claim to protect its citizens abroad. This gives a veneer of legitimacy and humanitarian reasoning, even when the action amounts to military aggression. Official justifications often include alleged threats to Russian-speaking people, claims of illegitimate government in the target country, or security concerns, arguments that closely mirror historic invasion pretexts. Second, the collapse of the Polish state. International view and criticism. Most of the world views these modern cases as violations of international law, illegal annexation or occupation, regardless of the pretexts. Scholars describe this as a recurring pattern, using protection of compatriots' minorities as a justification for expansion or control, rather than legitimate humanitarian or security reasons. Many of the justifications have been widely discredited by international courts, independent investigations, or counter-evidence, showing Russia's real motives were strategic, territorial, or geopolitical. So yes, modern Russia has repeatedly invoked pretexts such as protecting minorities or Russian-speaking citizens abroad to justify intervention or occupation in other countries. In practice, many view these pretexts as a repeat of older patterns of aggression, dressed as protection, just like the case you studied for 1939 to 1941. A. The Polish army was still fighting. B. The government did not disappear, it withdrew to France and continued to function. Moscow said that the Polish government had disintegrated and fled, and therefore the Polish state no longer existed, giving the Soviets the right to fill the vacuum. Third, restoring security on the borders. The Soviets claimed that the war between Germany and Poland had made the Soviet border threatened, and that the entry of the Red Army was a necessary security measure. The truth behind the pretexts. The clear historical fact today is the Soviet attack was carried out in accordance with the secret protocol of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, August 1939, in which Germany and the Soviet Union agreed to divide Poland and Eastern Europe between them. In other words, the Soviet attack was neither defensive nor humanitarian, but part of a joint imperial plan with Germany to partition Poland. On roads across the country, German columns and Soviet columns approached the agreed demarcation line. At places like Brest, command handed over, flags changed. How the conquerors arranged the conquest? A. Germany annexed western and northern regions directly into the Reich and turned the center into the general government, a colonial administration headquartered in Krakow. B. The Soviet Union annexed eastern Poland to the Soviet republics of Belarus and Ukraine, imposing Soviet legal codes, political structures, and security organs. The Polish state was gone. But Polish society did not vanish. What changed was who held the tools of repression and how they used them. One line on the map became two different regimes. Both believed the future could be engineered. Point 3. Occupation, engineering, and terror, 1939 to 1941. In the German zone, the plan was to break Poland so it could be used. The occupiers dissolved political life, closed institutions, seized property, and began a regime of forced labor. Anti-Jewish policy accelerated. Registration, confiscation, segregation, ghettoization. The general government would become the central stage of the Holocaust. Auschwitz began as a camp for Poles. and grew into a killing center for Europe's Jews. In the Soviet zone, the plan was to erase the old Poland from the east. Administrations were replaced, curricula rewritten, churches monitored, associations dissolved, the NKVD compiled lists. Arrests spread outward from officials and officers to teachers, landowners, and clergy. Deportations moved families by train into the interior of the USSR. In the spring of 1940, selected Polish prisoners, officers, policemen, and members of the intelligentsia were executed at sites, later known collectively by one name. That stands for many. Katyn. Katyn refers to the Katyn massacre, a series of mass executions of approximately 22,000 Polish citizens, primarily military officers, carried out by the Soviet NKVD in the spring of 1940. It is named after the Katyn forest in Russia, where some of the first mass graves were discovered in 1943, though killings also occurred at other locations. The term has come to symbolize this specific crime, and has also been used metaphorically to describe similar massacres and tragedies elsewhere. The massacre. The executions were ordered by the Soviet leadership, including Joseph Stalin, and targeted the Polish leadership and intelligentsia. Locations. While named after the forest in Russia, the executions took place across several sites, including the Kalinin and Kharkiv prisons, and in various killing fields in what is now Belarus and Ukraine. Symbolism. The event is a major symbol of totalitarian crime and the suffering of the Polish nation. It also represents the historical lie perpetuated by the Soviet Union, which initially blamed the Nazis for the crime, until the USSR officially admitted its responsibility in 1990. For ordinary people, occupation meant learning the new rules quickly enough to survive. For many Jews, it meant that survival had already been taken out of their hands. Point 4. From partners to enemies. Operation Barbarossa, June 1941. On 22 of June 1941, Germany attacked the Soviet Union across a front that ran from the Baltic to the Black Sea. The order had been signed months earlier. The expectation was a fast victory. The line tore through lands the USSR had annexed in 1939, including eastern Poland. For people living there, the occupier changed, but danger did not. Under German rule, the persecution of Jews escalated into systematic mass murder. Mobile killing squads shot entire communities. Ghettos were sealed, starved, liquidated. Trains began to run not just to camps, but to killing centers constructed for death on an industrial scale. During this time, the Polish underground state took form, a clandestine government with courts, schools, and a growing army, the Home Army. Abroad, the Polish government in exile worked from London to keep the question of Poland alive. After Germany turned on the USSR, Warsaw and Moscow renewed relations in the Sikorsky-Mayski Agreement, and a Polish army under General Anders formed on Soviet soil, then left, through Iran, to fight under British command. Polish soldiers would liberate towns in Italy and the Low Countries even, as their own land remained occupied. By the summer of 1944, the German advance had become a retreat. The Red Army reached the Vistula. One city would test whether military liberation and political freedom could arrive together. Point 5. 1944. The Warsaw Uprising and the Edge of Liberation. When Soviet forces reached the east bank of the Vistula, opposite Warsaw, in late July 1944, the Polish underground faced a choice with only bad outcomes. Wait. and risk that the city would be liberated by an army, backed by a rival political apparatus rise, and risk being crushed without outside support. On 1st of August, the Home Army chose to rise. For 63 days, Polish fighters held neighborhoods, raised flags, and broadcast to the world that their capital would not be handed over like a set of keys. The cost was catastrophic. German forces leveled districts, murdered civilians, and after the surrender, depopulated the city. Soviet troops did not take Warsaw then. The front stabilized. The Red Army paused. Arguments about intention began and have not ended. The uprising failed militarily, but the signal carried. It would be read differently in London, Moscow, and Washington, and remembered differently in Polish homes depending on who had survived. Winter changed the river. When the ice thickened and the offensives resumed, the line finally crossed the Vistula. Point 6, 1945. Liberation by the Red Army and the price. In January 1945, the Vistula-Oder offensive broke the German front in Poland. Warsaw fell on the 17th. Krakow followed. Poznan became a fortress and then a ruin. Soviet and Polish units moved west toward the Oder, and beyond it, toward Berlin. On 27 January, Soviet soldiers entered Auschwitz. They found warehouses of belongings, piles of shoes, and thousands of survivors too weak to walk away. In that place, liberation meant the end of immediate death and the beginning of a lifetime of remembering what had happened. Elsewhere, Soviet advances opened camps, ended ghetto remnants, and dismantled German authority, town by town. But the political settlement was forming elsewhere, and in other words, in Crimea, and later at Potsdam, the Allies agreed that a provisional government in Warsaw would be recognized, that Poland's borders would move west, and that elections would follow. The government in London lost recognition. In the months and years after victory, non-communist resistance was suppressed, and a communist Soviet consolidated with Moscow's support. Point 7. Aftermath. Borders, governments, and lives. 1945 to 1947. The new western border brought Silesian, Pomeranian, and former German territories under Polish administration. The east moved to the new Soviet line. Millions were uprooted, Germans fleeing or expelled from the new Polish lands, Poles leaving the east for the west, Jews searching for the few who might have lived. Trials began for some perpetrators. Archives grew with lists and testimonies. Yet for many, especially former Home Army members, the new state meant interrogation, imprisonment, or worse. The question, who liberated Poland, thus had two answers at once. The army that defeated the Germans, and the system that followed in its wake. Which answer a family gave depended on what they had endured and what they faced next. The paperwork that opened this story closes it too. Treaties and communiques that named borders, governments, and promises, the last of which would be measured against how people actually lived. Point 8. Coda, evidence and meaning. Everything you have seen, pacts, protocols, notes, directives, maps, was written before it was lived. The Non-Aggression Pact and its secret protocol shaped September 1939. The Boundary and Friendship Treaty confirmed, a partition already enforced. The German directive for Barbarossa broke the arrangement and brought a different terror to places the Soviets had annexed. The Allied communiques at the end of the war stabilized frontiers and certified a government, that would not be freely chosen. The words ally, enemy, and liberation shift meaning when time shifts. In August 1939, Berlin and Moscow were partners of convenience. In September, they were joint destroyers of a state. In June 1941, they were enemies, and Poland became a battlefield again. In 1945, the Red Army freed Polish lands from German rule, and a new political order took hold that made freedom conditional and opposition dangerous. Poland was destroyed by two regimes, freed from one by the other. The USSR and Nazi Germany both invaded Poland in 1939. They were partners in the destruction and occupation of the Polish state. But when Germany later attacked the USSR in 1941, the Soviets pushed the German army back and eventually entered Poland again, this time fighting against Nazi Germany. But that does not make the USSR a hero or an angel. The truth is simple. The USSR did not liberate Poland because it cared about freedom. It liberated Poland because it wanted to defeat Germany and expand its own control. In fact, the USSR destroyed Poland in 1939. The USSR occupied eastern Poland and carried out mass arrests and deportations. After the war, the USSR did not give Poland real independence. Instead, it replaced German occupation with Soviet domination and installed a communist regime controlled from Moscow. So, even though the USSR fought against Nazi Germany after 1941, that does not erase the fact that the Soviet Union was never a defender of freedom. Germany and the USSR were different dictatorships. Both were oppressive, both committed atrocities, and both harmed Poland. Defeating one evil doesn't automatically turn the other into the good guy, and then bound to the one that remained. The proof is in the papers, the footprints, and the graves. Before you leave, ask yourself two questions. Have we truly learned from 1939, or are we watching the same logic repeat itself? And if invading Poland was called defensive in 1939, how should we judge similar claims today? I would genuinely like to know your answer. Share your thoughts in the comments. The next scenes contain real archival footage, showing what happened in Poland between 1939 and 1945. Like what you saw? Smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell to never miss a story.